All right. Hello, folks. Welcome to another Tuesday pairing stream. I have with me a fabulous James Shore, author of Art of Agile Development and all-around great guy. James, why don't you say hi?
Hi, everybody. I'm James Shore, fabulous and all-around great guy, apparently. It's news to me, but I appreciate the sentiment.
So for those of you who've tuned in before, we're basically on part 3 of our journey, I guess, towards A-frame architecture and nullable infrastructure wrappers and design and Java and testing and all that good stuff. So the last couple of sessions we have been working on this Yacht dice game, which I originally wrote in hexagonal architecture form. And James has been taking us through Nullables and refactoring towards that. And so today we're going to look at so last time and the time before we looked at sort of how do we get random numbers, and so now we're going to sort of step up the complexity and look at how do we talk to external services.
Yeah, and I believe your current system, the current way you're doing that uses mocks when you're testing the code that uses those adapters, and this time we're going to be modifying it so they can be done with sociable tests using nullables rather than interaction-based tests using mocks.
Yeah, so should we look at the code and see where it's at?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is the code that we're working with, and you can look at the code. It's open source. You're welcome to look at it. You can look through all the commits that we've done over the past couple of weeks. And in fact, I even drew a little diagram for sort of what we're looking at today.
Nice.
So this is the Yacht Dice game sort of core code, its domain code, its rules for the game. And these boxes on the outside are the adapters in hexagonal architecture. So this one here, this is the notifier. Its job is to tell this Yacht Score Tracker over here, which is a separate service currently running up on Railway, and it has two purposes. It takes in information about scores, and then there is another service that is called a fetcher that gets information, basically the average score for a category. Welcome, Sugi. And so currently these are two different ports. Even though they're talking to the same service, the way Hexagonal looks at this is they are, in a sense, two different reasons for talking to this external service. One is notifying it of stuff that happened, and another is asking for information. The fact that it's the same service is really an implementation detail from the Hexagonal architecture point of view. One of the things that Hexagonal likes is keeping ports very sort of finely grained.
So we got somebody who tweeted us on Twitter, Steve Bement, I believe the name is, saying, I don't know of anything in Hexagonal saying you need to have separate adapters for read and write. Have you seen differently? You want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so in terms, one of the things about hexagonal architecture is again, like it's not like there was a book by Alistair Coburn who created the pattern. He wrote a page back in 2005, so there was not a lot of detail, and even it's one of those things that over time has been interpreted differently. So the way I interpret it might be different than the way other people interpret it. However, one thing that has come up a few times in discussions with Alistair and others on Twitter is that these adapters, so what I didn't draw here was the ports, the interfaces that represent how to communicate with them. So it's actually really important to talk about the ports because they're the thing that your sort of application talks to
To the point that hexagonal architecture is also known as ports and adapters.
Exactly, yeah.
Because the hexagon part is actually kind of irrelevant. Like, it's just the shape he chose to draw. When I first heard about hexagonal, I was like, oh, this hexagon is deeply meaningful. And that's partly, I think, why I found it so confusing for so long, because it doesn't really matter. Like, it's just irrelevant. The fact that it's a hexagon has nothing to do with anything, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and so the main reason Alistair went with hexagon is he wanted something that was different than rectangles, but that also was sort of visually sort of symmetrical, and there was this sense of a left side and a right side, and so this idea of from the left side triggers stuff that happens in the hexagon, and then the hexagon may do further communication outside and may or may not respond to that sort of original trigger.
Yeah, and that honestly did not come through to me at all reading Alistair's original paper. For a long time, people would ask me, what do you think of hexagonal architecture? And then after I came up with A-frame architecture, they said, well, how does that compare to hexagonal architecture? And I'd have to say, I have no idea. I've read Alistair's paper multiple times now, and it still makes no sense to me. And part of that was I thought the hexagon was supposed to mean something, and it didn't.
Right.
But that idea of a left and a right did not really come through to me at all. Now it makes more sense. I've been working with you. I worked with Matt Wynn, who's also a big fan of hexagonal architecture. We finished our live stream on that today.
Oh, cool.
And so now I think I've got a much better understanding of it. And I think ports and adapters is probably a better name for it than hexagonal architecture, because the hexagon is sort of arbitrary. It could be an octagon or really any other polygon that had a left and a right.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Have you tried drawing an octagon freehand? I can't do it. Hexagon is about the limit of how I can draw freehand. It's like, wait, where do I draw?
And you don't want to have a rectangle, because you do want your adapters to connect to different faces of the hexagon.
Yes.
It's all coming clear to me now.
Yes.
Like, literally, as we're talking, I'm starting to get it, why it's called a hexagon. I still don't love it, but I'm starting to get it.
I actually prefer hexagonal, referring to as hexagonal over ports and adapters, because I feel like it's more than just the ports and adapters. But we could sort of quibble over the name. I think the main thing is so Alistair Coburn is known for also being having written a couple of books on use cases. One of the sort of the language he uses for the two sides is sometimes referring to how it comes up in use cases, which is this would be primary and these would be secondary adapters. I will sometimes talk about that. I prefer sort of inbound and outbound because it's a lot more clear in terms of how they're used, but I think that primary and secondary are interesting from a use case standpoint. And this brings back to the adapter on this sort of outbound side is very much how are they going to be used? And so there's another fellow on Twitter who goes by JGP, and I don't remember how to pronounce his last name. I'll have to dig up the link. Talks about sort of for use, like what is this for? And so you could even name this thing as this is for fetching and this is for notifying. And so this idea that they are fine-grained is implied but not stated in Alistair's original stuff. But it is implied in some of the later things he talks about. But for me, I find it really useful to be fine-grained for testability. I don't have to fake, mock, stub, whatever needs to do for testing with a wide interface. And so the narrower the interface for this port, the easier it is to substitute a stub or something for testability.
Right. One thing that's, I think, worth mentioning when we're talking about hexagonal is I'm fairly certain, you talked about the influence of use cases, I'm fairly certain that hexagonal architecture is something that came from Alistair's days at IBM, which preceded his involvement with Agile and the creation. He participated in creation of the Agile Manifesto at Snowbird, which he lived in Salt Lake City at the time. And Snowbird, of course, is a ski resort outside of Salt Lake City. I believe hexagonal architecture predated his involvement in the Agile movement. He wrote it up in 2005 or whatever the date was, but I believe it actually came out of his work at IBM, which is also where I think a lot of his use case work came out of.
Yeah, he's been actually digging out some of his older writings on OO. I mean, I remember when I first came across his OO stuff in the 90s, and I was like, oh, this seems to make a bit more sense to me than some of the other more formal, shall we say, books and information. So yeah, there is so you look at some of the earlier materials, and there's definitely you can see it. I don't know that that was fully formed until much later, but you'd have to talk to him.
Yeah. So what we're going to be doing today, so this stream has been about two things. One, it's been about sociable testing with nullables. And the other thing it's been about is about A-frame architecture, which is a approach to architecture it's very similar to Gary Bernhardt's. I think last time I said Gary Bernstein, but it's Gary Bernhardt, I believe, if I'm getting that right.
Yeah.
Gary Bernhardt's imperative shell declarative core. But in that, it's about saying that we've got sort of a overarching control system, and then infrastructure, which is allowed to talk to the outside world, and logic, which is not allowed to talk to the outside world. Now, it's not purely, the logic does not have to be purely functional in A-frame architecture. I like purely functional approaches, but sometimes a stateful domain layer is more appropriate. And when you talk about hexagonal architecture, you tend to talk about a domain that inside the hexagon is the domain layer. Well, when I'm talking about the logic layer, yes, I love domain-driven design. I love domain-based design. But sometimes a simple transaction script is just easier and makes more sense for the problem.
Yep.
But what I want to be really clear about is that nullables enable A-frame architecture. It would be hard to do A-frame architecture without using nullables, because then nullables are simpler in terms of the amount of interfaces you need than sort of traditional test doubles. But even though nullables enable A-frame architecture, they don't require it. So what I was thinking we could do today, Ted, was we could start out and just make your average score fetcher and score category notifier, make those two classes nullable. And then we can pause there and say, look, this is what nullability gets us. And hopefully what that will get us is the ability to use social tests rather than mock-based tests in the code that uses the tests that test things that depend on these two things.
Right.
But then if we have time, then I think it would also be interesting to say, well, now that we have these using nullables and we no longer need the ports, what does that result in? Where, if we were doing this in an A-frame style, what would that look like? So that's sort of my thought for what we do today. Does that work for you?
Yep, that sounds like a great plan.
How about you show folks, I know we've gone through this in the last couple of times, but I think just really briefly, if you could bring up the actual web UI and show people what we're doing here.
I'm glad you asked.
Maybe not run through the whole thing, but specifically show like the notifier and fetcher and how they fit into it.
All right. Yeah, what's the local port? 9090, because everything's running on a different port. Uh-oh.
I swear this worked last time we were in here.
Oh, that's because it's hitting the local version of the service. So let me start that up. There we go. Let's try that again. There we go. So roll the dice. I'll just assign it directly to 2s. And so this here, this piece of information is the average score. The average score is retained by the Yacht Score Tracker. That's its job, is to accept new scores, so the scores per category, hold on to that. And so if we basically started a new game and I roll the dice, so we can already see that it's showing the average score. And if for some bizarre reason I decided to assign this to 2s again, then we can see that the average score has now changed. to reflect the fact that there's now 2 scores that it's holding on to. And so that's what the service is.
This incredibly compelling game that will soon have loads and loads of people subscribing and sending you ridiculous amounts of money. They're going to want to know, how is my score comparing to all the other incredibly smart, talented, and good-looking people?
Because everyone is above average, right?
Everyone is above average, right? That should be our next use case. Is we want to just knock it down a couple of points so people feel good about it. That's what real salesmanship is about.
That's right.
Okay, so that's the game. The other thing I'd like to see is, now nullables are not a tool for testing the service wrapper. So we've got the HttpAverageScoreFetcher, we've got the HttpScoreCategoryNotifier. Those are the 2 concrete classes that are actually wrapping the service. Right. If you wouldn't mind, making a little space there.
Yep.
Now, I have not looked at this up until now, but I'm just sort of assuming based on what I know of the structure that this is what wraps that. When we make this nullable, that's not going to make testing these 2 things any easier. It's, if you're testing a third-party service and you're doing it in a thorough way, you have to either spin up that service or make some sort of simulator of that service, using a tool like WireMock, for example, and test that it actually does what you think it does. But the code that uses this is what hexagonal architecture tries to solve for. And this is what A-frame architecture and nullables try to solve for. When you are testing code that uses this code, it's kind of a pain because you don't want it talking to the outside world.
Right.
You don't want to go and set up your WireMock or run the real service and take the 500 milliseconds or whatever it takes. I've been working with Matt Wynn, and he's got some code that tests a GitHub does GitHub actions. And so he actually interfaces for his tests his actual GitHub client.
Right.
And it takes about 1.5 seconds for one of those tests to run, which is really
that's
slow.
Crazy. That's so slow. I can't wait that long.
It's really slow.
I'm really
so we don't want
impatient.
that. So the question is how do we test the code that uses these things? And that's ultimately where nullables comes in. So can you show us where the code that the tests of the code that use either the notifier or the fetcher?
Yep. So let's take a look at let's see. So that's that test. We want the fake version of it. So that's an application. Here we go. So this is the one that does the fetcher.
Now this is okay, so game service is, we talked about this a lot in the last episode, last time, but game service is sort of your sort of fundamental application layer abstraction. I call it application layer. I think in Hexagonal it's got a different term.
No, application layer is what I call it. So basically, so you mentioned earlier that Hexagonal, that sort of transaction script is also useful instead of having a sort of a richer, larger domain if it's not necessary. And actually, Hexagonal says nothing about it. It just so happens that a lot of folks, myself included, like to have a layered system inside the hexagon. And so you have the application, which, as you just said, is the thing that's sort of orchestrating and driving stuff on the outside. And then there's the domain that implements all the rules.
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, what happens is that when on that web page, when you press the button, do you still have that web page available for us to look at?
Yep.
Yeah. So when you press the roll dice button, when you press a category button, what that's doing is that's talking to the game service and saying, roll the dice for me, assign this score to a category. And that's turning around. And there's a good example, line 36.
Right.
That's doing the roll dice. Later on, it's when you say assign it to a category, there it is. And that's talking to your domain layer. That's talking to the domain model that you've created, which we can see on the left here, which has the game, it's got the hand of dice, it's got the scoreboard, and so forth.
Right.
So going back to your test, you've got your tests for game service split out into 3 separate tests: game service average fetcher test, game service die roller test, and game service notification test.
Right.
So yeah, I just wanted to sort of clear that up for everybody, how this fit into the big
right.
picture.
And I do this because, and I think this came up a little bit last time, is since the game service is like a method like this, right, where we assign the role to it's here's where it's doing the coordination, is it's calling a command on the game to change its state, and then doing some external thing, and this is where it's sort of coordinating with the outside world. It's telling somebody, hey, a role has been assigned with this information. And because this part was added afterwards, the tests that I wrote were focused on the new behavior. And so that's how we ended up with tests that's specific to average fetcher test and notification test.
Right, right. So let me just take a look at this. This is the entire class, it looks like, just one screen.
Yep.
And so what we're doing, we're creating a new game service. We're passing in what looks like a stub for the notifier.
Basically null object for the notifier. Mm-hmm. So because we're isolating the fetcher, but we need it, but the game service requires a notifier, so we have to basically pass it. You could actually, it's almost a dummy because it's actually not used inside the code that we're going to execute.
Yeah, and I see you're defining that on line 15 right here. So that's just saying, yeah, nothing happens. And then you're passing in a stub, and then you're passing in the die roller. Now, die roller is using the nullable pattern now. It is a nullable, and that's why we've got the die roller.create factory method on that. And you could do create null there.
I could do create null. In fact, probably I should.
Yeah. It doesn't matter in this case because using the random numbers versus using the null version doesn't matter. But if it was an outside service, then it would be a bigger deal.
Yep.
Okay, and then down on line 30, you're doing the same thing, and you're asserting that the average is 4, blah, blah, blah. It contains entry, blah, blah, blah. So average score fetcher stub, one thing that's I would have expected to see here is that average score fetcher stub, if that's getting the scores from the service, I would expect the stub would be configured with the scores you wanted to get back. Are they just hard-coded instead?
They are hard-coded because I never got around to making it more obvious. So generally, I wouldn't leave it this way. It's just I forgot about it, and so this is where it was left. We can bring up the fetcher.
Such is life. I would be a little bit uncomfortable showing the code I've written that I've not written for the purposes of sharing with the world. Yeah. Because even though I do test it and I do my best, there's always something.
Yeah. So really, what I should have is the stub should be configurable with what is the value that's going to be returned. What's the stub value going to be returned for a specific category? Because that's how the fetcher works. The fetcher basically says, "Hey, give me the average score for this score category, 2s, 3s, big straight, and so on." So by looking at the test, this violates my readable in isolation rule.
Which is a great rule. It's the same rule I have.
Yeah, because it's not at all obvious. Why is it 12?
By the way, I noticed you don't use before each and after each, and I don't either. But I'd love for you to talk about the reason why you don't use before each.
It's exactly that rule. I want to be able to, especially, here this test class doesn't have a lot of tests in it, but if you've got a test class that has a reasonable number of methods in it, 10, 15, you're going to be scrolled down 2/3 of the way through the thing. And any before or after is going to be non-obvious that it's being executed and doing any kind of setup or teardown. And so there's the acronym FIRST for what tests should be: fast, isolated, and so on. And so isolated, to me, I interpret in 2 ways. One is I should be able to run them in isolation. But I should be able to read them in isolation. And I should be able to read this assert and know exactly why am I asserting what I'm asserting. Mm-hmm. This violates that because why am I getting 12? No idea. Mm-hmm. Whereas in most of my typical tests, I will make it very clear In fact, in some cases, I'll use what Ken Peck calls evident data, where I might even do a little bit of math of showing very direct connections between the setup part of the test and the assertion part.
Now, one thing that I do that I find really useful and is perhaps less useful here because it's very small, but if we had 5 tests in this code, for example, we wouldn't want to be repeating line 20 over and over again.
Correct. Right. And so this, absolutely the same thing. If we look at, in fact, some of the more, let's say, in-depth tests, let's see, trying to see ones, but probably not in domain. Let's look at, yeah, so here, create game servers with die rolls of. And I think we might have done some of that, but basically that's my goal is if I'm doing something often enough, and so there's 2 reasons. Some people might use a before, but I figure like this is just code. And you probably feel the same way. It's like we refactor code that is hard to read or lengthy or has details that we don't care about. We put those
and the other advantage of this, like look at line 19 versus line 30 here. One thing that I found in any test, any set of tests that gets complicated that uses before each, eventually your before each needs multiple different configurations for different kinds of tests, and it becomes very obtuse. Whereas being able to just call a function and say, this is my setup data, and have it do that setup with exactly the data you want, it makes everything more readable.
Yeah, now, and Java tends to be also a little verbose, and
to say it lightly,
to put it lightly, and so there's often a lot of what you might consider noise. In other words, stuff that does not contribute to what is the purpose of this test. And so here, like you said, it's like these tests are really small. There are only 2 of them. If I was going to write one more, that would put me over to basically refactoring this out into a single well-named method.
Yeah, so the classic 3 strikes, then you refactor. I think it was Martin Fowler who said that originally. So we've got a couple of choices here, Ted. In part 1, we made the dice roller nullable, and it was effectively a fetcher. And what we did was we replaced an existing stub with the nullable. Right. So we could do that again, only with a slightly more complicated use case. Or we could do the notifier, which is a different type of problem, which is how do we talk to the outside world? We probably have time to do both today. So which way do you think would be more interesting? It might be nice to start with a fetcher just to sort of reinforce what we've already done.
Yeah, I was going to say let's start with the fetcher since it's similar but different. Okay. And then we can get to the more advanced one.
So what we're going to do is ultimately what we want to do here is inside of game service average fetcher test and any other test that depends on game service or the average score fetcher. What we want to be able to do is have that use a null version of the average score fetcher rather than a stub.
Right.
And the advantage of the null version, as I've mentioned before, is that it's more real. Like we're pushing the dissimilarity all the way out to the edges so that we can write sociable tests that run the actual production code so that if we ever make changes to that production code that break something, our tests will fail. And the way we're going to do that is by modifying average score fetcher's concrete implementation, wherever that is.
Sounds good. I'm going to run all the tests just to be sure we're actually at a good starting point. All right, they are all operational, so we're in a good place.
Hey, Oya, good to see you again.
Hey, Oya. Welcome, welcome. So what should I open? Should I open up?
Yeah, so let's go into the test and production code for the fetcher.
Okay.
For the actual fetcher.
Production code for the actual fetcher.
Yeah, not the game service.
Yeah. What's that implementation? Oh, whoops, that's not what I wanted. So this is the actual production fetcher.
Right, yeah. And does that have a test associated with it?
Does this have a test? No, this one does not have a test associated with it.
Okay. Okay, so you can close the test. So we're going to need to make a test for it. So let's start by doing that.
All right. Split.
Okay. So normally I would put a test around this sort of thing, but I don't know that that's a good use of our time today. And I could see why you didn't, because writing tests on third-party services is a pain in the butt.
And it's not, yeah, I mean, there's not really weird. Yeah, I mean, basically the code I'm executing is REST template, which is Spring, get for entity. And so
yeah,
any test really we would write would be against Spring, which would, or against,
it's very similar to the dice rolling. We don't want to, when we were doing the dice rolling, we didn't want to test the random number generator because that was the third-party code. What we did want to do was make sure that we were calling the thing correctly. So in the case of the random number generator, we wanted to make sure it was generating a number between 1 and 6. In the case of this one, I think what we want to test is really what's on line 10, which is that are we calling the correct API? And if you had a more complicated API, that would be more important. But since you don't, and there's not really, and also the get average on line 20, those are, I think, it's really line 10 and line 20 are the only things that we need to test. Or not test.
Or not test, right.
But the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a couple of ways that I do my HTTP clients, which is ultimately what you have here. Some people would call it a REST client, but REST means different things to different people, so I'm going to avoid doing that.
Yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah, ultimately, you've got an HTTP client here. It's making a call to a website, literally HTTP rather than HTTPS, and that it's a GET. And if you were to actually go there, you would see like a bunch of JSON come back, presumably. Is that what it is?
Yep. In fact, we can actually see it. So.
Yeah, so you
and we can see this is what it gets back.
Yeah, so we get a JSON. It's got a category. It's got average, and ultimately, doing this sort of thing well means parsing that. It means checking for data errors. It means looking for 404s and redirects and all that kind of crazy stuff, which you've just decided not to do for this example, and that's the kind of stuff that you'd want to have tests around.
Yeah, exactly. All the resilience and error handling.
Yeah, and timeouts. What do we do when we talk to the service and it decides to give us 1 byte every 10 seconds? That really happens. So
those are the worst. It's like if you're gonna not work, just don't work.
Yeah. I like to tell people that when you're talking to a third-party network system, you have to be paranoid because they really are out to get you.
Yes.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong eventually. So anyway, my point here is that typically in a larger system, you're going to have multiple things that talk to different HTTP servers, and you'll have a lot of different REST-like clients. And so the way I typically do my infrastructure wrappers in that environment is I actually make a low-level infrastructure wrapper called HTTP client, because I'm super creative that way. And then my higher level wrappers use that low-level wrapper. Now, there's less need to do that sort of thing because you've got Spring effectively doing that for you.
Yeah.
But it does mean that some of the nullability stuff that we're going to do would be duplicated if we had multiple clients. So if you're going to use nullables, you probably would have the low-level wrapper as well as the higher level wrapper. So my question for you is, how do you think we should do that in this case? Does it make sense to do the low level thing, or should we just start out and do it once here and then punt on having the low level wrapper?
I kind of think like the the low level wrapper, still, like you said, it's like Spring's already doing that for us. I mean, there is this thing called a test rest template, which provides something, but that's not all that useful anyway. So I don't know that there's much use in trying to wrap that part.
Yeah, let's start out by just doing it at this level, and then we might. Actually, it looks like Oya in the comments is saying exactly what I was thinking. Start from the outside, refactor the low-level wrapper out if needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where I'd be inclined to start. We do actually have two different classes that are using the REST template wrapper, I presume, because you've got the notifier.
Yes, and typically this is not the way I'd probably do this in production. I'd probably actually have this auto-wired by Spring, so it would provide it through constructor injection, in which case you could then say, I mean, instantiating this is not a big deal, but in reality you'd have it injected by Spring, as well as you might even inject other higher level things. So there's resilience libraries already available that I would just plug right in to do all the retry stuff. So but yes, there is in the this notifier, it also has basically the same exact thing. And this is now clearly two instances of something that really has no state and doesn't need to have two of them.
Yeah. But I don't know if it has no state, then the performance impact is. Well, the performance impact is negligible.
Yeah. It's more when you have to do configuration on it for all sorts of things, putting in headers and other kinds of things. Especially once you get into, most likely you'd have some kind of authorization to be able to talk to this service, things like that.
Which is why I do tend to have a single adapter for a single service, because all that sort of goes into that one adapter. But that's another conversation for us to have later when we start talking about A-frame architecture.
Yeah.
So so let's go ahead and let's make a test for this that says that that the null version, and we'll wordsmith this in a moment, but what we want to do is have the null version return a value without actually talking to the outside world. And no configured value, just a default value.
Something like that.
Yeah. And let's have that call HttpAverageScoreFetcher.createNull. And let's just make that work.
Thanks for the great name. Okay.
Okay, I presume that passes tests.
Depending on if we assert anything, but it certainly will compile. Oops, I did not want to run all the tests.
Yeah, I tend to use run passes test as a synonym for it compiled.
Same.
And runs and passes the tests.
Same. Okay.
So yeah. Okay, so now let's say that when we call fetcher.average4, we get 42 back.
Okay. What do we want to pass in for the parameter?
Oh, the score category. I think any score category, really.
That's the first one that came up. That's what we'll do. And 42.0. All right. So we predict this is going to fail.
Yeah. I use, whenever I have a default that is not a string, like if it's a string, I'll just say null whatever. But if it's a number, then I'll and it's valid, I'll use 42 as my, this was unconfigured value.
So that failed because our fetcher is actually null. So we got a null pointer exception on this, which IntelliJ
That's exactly what we want.
was hinting at us.
Yeah. So what we need to do at this point is we need to start implementing the embedded stub. But before we do that, I wonder if we want to create the static create method to create some symmetry here.
Sure.
So I don't know if you want to ignore that test or what.
So what I could do is I could do a refactoring where I replace the constructor of this with the static method and have IntelliJ do that for me.
That would be perfect. Yeah.
So let me introduce that. That should currently be called by that. And then we can replace it with a factory method. And we're just going to call this create. So that made this one private. And then created the create over here.
And just for those of you watching, using a factory method is not required. We could have used an overloaded constructor, but I just like the symmetry of having a create null and a create. But it's not really part of the pattern. It's just the way I tend to do it.
All right.
And I personally would put the constructor below the statics. Is that how you,
yes.
you prefer to have it?
Yes.
Above? Okay. So yeah, let's have create null return new HttpAverageScoreFetcher as well.
Okay. So now if we run it, we expect it to, well, certainly not return 42 because that could never be the average.
It will probably fail because the service isn't running.
The service actually is running.
Oh, well, okay.
I could tear it down and we could make it fail differently.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
I'm fine with this. But what we do need to do is we're not really ready to implement this. So let's go ahead and ignore this test for now. So what we need to do is some refactoring.
Okay.
So the way I implement nullables, as you know, is it's all encapsulated. You can implement it any way you like. But the way I've found that works best is to use an embedded stub because that allows us to push the decision about whether we're talking to the outside world or not out of our production code and into the thinnest possible wrapper so that when we make a change to average 4, our test that used the nullable will also break if that would break the real code. But in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to have the ability to control on line 27 of the production code. We need to be able to control restTemplate.getForEntity, which means that we need to turn restTemplate into an interface and implement a concrete real version of that and a stubbed out version that just our null will use.
All right.
Now, I don't know if restTemplate already has an interface, but even if it does, it's probably bigger than we want. So
I could look at it. Probably does have an interface, but it's intercepting. Yeah, it's REST operations, which is going to be all of them,
right? Which we do not want.
Yeah.
So we want to make an interface that we'll use in place of restTemplate, and with a concrete implementation that only has getForEntity.
Okay. So let's extract this, getForEntity. Do we want to parameterize just the score category since everything else is sort of hard-coded?
No, we have to follow the existing interface.
Oh, okay. All right. So then let's...
We're really only doing this to satisfy Java's type checker.
Yeah. So let me do that. Then I'll push this out into parameter. And we'll just call this API. We'll just call it URL. And then push this as a parameter. And this is the response type. And everything else is line, but let me permute the parameters. So URL should be first, then that. Okay, great.
But score category can't be it has to be the actual, exactly the same as the real things, which I believe in this case is a string.
So that's string and that's T. Okay, so that's string and that should be, oh, we'll put that as unknown. Do that. I have to type it. That's what we want. Do this to make it easier. Okay. That satisfies, and that that needs to be just so that's what you were saying about the strings. Let's push this out to be.
Yeah, what we want to do is mirror the REST templates interface exactly. So whatever name it uses should be what the name we use.
Yeah. Oh, so that's an object variable, right? Okay, so let's do that.
I think it's URI variables is the name that they use.
So let's see. Response type URL. Okay, great.
And then up on line 27, are you doing the toString on the score category?
Indeed I am.
Hey, Simon, welcome.
Simon, nice to see you. All right.
Okay, that should still work, right? I guess we don't have tests around it, so we don't know.
We disabled that. Let's enable it. So this should still fail with 0 instead of 42.
Right.
And it does. So that works.
Good.
Yep. I always love how a test that fails in a predictable, known, expected way, to me, is a form of green.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've got get for entity, what we want to do is move that into a class.
Move it into a class as an implementation. So
can I drive for a minute?
Sure.
There'll be our first time trying to get whatever code together thing that we're using here. So yeah, what I'm imagining is interface our REST template, which is going to have get response entity
okay, yep.
T,
right,
or something.
Yep.
Get for entity string URL class response type blah blah blah.
Right.
And then, and I think I've got that wrong. And then our class real REST template, and we can prove these names, that then has
right
that in it.
Right.
That's what I'm imagining.
Yep. Gotcha.
I'll hand it back to you.
All right.
Oh, except one difference here. I would probably just construct the REST template out of here.
Yeah. You would not have it as a final variable of the implementation?
Sorry, what did you say?
Would you not have this as an instance variable of the real thing?
Doesn't really matter to me.
I just have a problem creating a new object every single time we're doing a get.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
It takes nanoseconds, and
but it does use up a non-trivial amount of memory. So
what'd you say?
It uses up a non-trivial amount of memory. Because this is not it's not a trivial object, so
it's not a lightweight thing. Yeah. I don't mind it being final.
So let's do that. Oops. Okay. So that's that. So we come up with a better
name. Call that, instead of our REST template, let's call that REST template wrapper.
Okay. And now this is real REST template wrapper, which is a weird...
Or just...
How about just real REST template?
Yeah, just real REST template, I think.
And... if we're gonna do that, we're gonna have to do that. And I think that's right.
I think you'll need the T's on line 48 as well.
Let's see, when... You're not going to clean it up for me? Fine. And this is going to be T. Okay. Now that looks good.
Hey, I just want to note that Code Together worked.
Yeah, that was actually pretty nice, other than this annoying thing here.
And we didn't have to mess around with the Zoom windows and all your screen sharing stuff, which would apparently drove you nuts every single time we tried it last time.
It drove me a little nuts, yeah. Simon says, was quoting Ted the other day about the prediction test outcome. Oh, cool. Oh, hey, Wheatlow. He has to find non-trivial.
What was the non-trivial comment about?
The REST template being non-trivial. Let's see. So we now want to use in our create null. What do we want to do? Do we want to replace? Sorry, I think I lost of what step we're at.
That's okay. So yeah, we can now get rid of line 34.
Right.
And instead of having, and if you scroll up, instead of having private final REST template equals new REST template, now it can be a new real REST template.
So this would be REST template wrapper.
Yeah.
And this would be new. Oops. Real REST template. And then we need to parameterize it.
There's something going on with our generics that I'm not getting.
So basically, it depends on where we want to define the type that's going to be returned.
We want to do it the exact same way you do it with the actual REST template class.
Then we need to just say, so the wrapper itself is not, that's what's going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think the class is parameterized. I think only the method is parameterized. Yeah,
only the method is parameterized, yep.
So maybe it's get for entity bracket T bracket?
No, there needs to be another T in there. So hold on, let me...
I think maybe...
I'm going to look at how they do it.
Can I try something real quick?
Sure.
I think maybe where we need it... Oh, I can't drive on your...
Oh.
I was looking at the screen share. I think what we want is just to have it here. Is that valid code?
No, I think we need to have it... it needs to be defined somewhere like here. I always forget where it is. Yeah, like that. It's basically like it needs it from somewhere, and it's got to be defined somewhere.
Okay.
I don't think that's quite right.
It seems to be compiling.
But it seems to be compiling. It's been a while since I've had to define generics on an implementation.
Right. So what happens if we look at the decompiled version of Git for entity?
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. So what I want is not mine. Is let me look in production.
There we go.
So if we look at Git for entity, yeah, I was right. That's how it does it. Okay, good.
Yeah, I do not like that syntax.
Generics are not the most fun when you're on the library defining really side. Loved. Yeah. So basically you have to say that there's a T somewhere implied somewhere, and here's where you get to specify it, and we want to reuse the same one here.
There's a T somewhere. Let's just put it at the beginning. Why not?
I remember back when generics first came out, I was at Google, and I just have this memory seared into my memory of it was 4 of us standing around a screen just being totally baffled by some code that was using generics that now I would have no problem with, but it was just so baffling.
It took me a long time to really wrap my head around generics. Yeah. Like, what is this angle bracket T stuff? What does T mean? Why can't we use a meaningful name? Well, it turns out there is no meaningful name.
There is no meaningful name. It just says some type, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So Simon is asking about REST template. So REST template is part of Spring Framework's way of communicating with external services. So it does a whole bunch of stuff underneath that you would expect of some kind of library that handles things. Deeply what it does besides just the communications, it will also handle the message conversion of the raw JSON into an instance of the class that you specify. So it does that. It does that for you.
And what happens if it doesn't translate? Like if you get back an error,
it will
JSON or fields or something.
Yeah, if it can't translate the incoming JSON into that class, it will throw an exception.
But not a checked exception. It looks like it.
No, it'll be a not checked exception.
That seems wrong to me because checked exceptions, in my understanding of the world, are for things that the programmer does everything perfectly and an error can still occur.
Yeah. Yeah.
I may be one of the only people in the world that really likes the idea of checked exceptions.
I'm with you on that. Like I totally think that checked exceptions were given a bad name because people didn't understand that that's what it was for.
Right.
Like if you could fix it, then you should, it should be declared. But
yeah, and if we were making this production grade, I would say that average 4 should throw a checked exception that we create, and then we should catch that unchecked exception and turn around and do something with it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the right thing.
Yeah. So it throws a REST client exception, which is basically a runtime exception.
Yeah.
There's even worse things about the way REST template does stuff. So it will actually throw an exception if you get a 400 series of errors in certain situations. Like, to me, that's not an error. That's just,
well, it's definitely something that has gone wrong.
Yeah, but it should be thrown an exception. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah. Kademlia, if I'm pronouncing your name right, says that it's already in maintenance mode. So apparently that's been replaced with something else.
It has been sort of superseded by web client. I was one of those who railed against the idea that REST template should be put into maintenance mode. They're actually going to deprecate it, but like web client is from the whole reactive point of view of doing things. And personally, I think reactive was a bad idea.
It's pretty heavyweight.
It's
a whole paradigm.
Yeah, it's a whole different paradigm. And like, look, most people are not doing reactive. They're doing request response. So why are you going to replace it with something that makes it a little bit harder to do request response? Makes no sense to me. So they sort of backed off and said, we'll keep it, but we're not going to do much with it, which is fine because like I don't need it to do anything else. What else does it need to do?
So this is exactly why I make a low-level infrastructure wrapper for HTTP client. so that I can wrap up whatever garbage I'm given.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever lovely code that
whatever wonderful
painstakingly put together for me, and I can wrap it with the proper exception handling and checking, and if they don't already do 300 follows, do the 300 follows, like just have all that stuff handled for me.
Yeah.
And then I'll just use the same thing, and I'll make that nullable, and I'll use it over and over and over in all my projects, right? Because then it's just reusable.
Yeah, so I do that similar. I just have that be injected into the thing that's gonna use the thing. Yeah.
Right. So let's get this to the point where it actually runs, and then let's run our tests and see it fail properly, and then we can make it nullable.
So let's see. So we're gonna create now. So we're gonna replace. So this is the real REST template, but we're not currently using it. So let's go use it.
I'm just looking at line 28. Yeah, we want to. Oh, you're right. We just need to call REST template dot.
Yeah, I think that's. Okay. I think that's it.
Yeah, the test is disabled, so we're not going to see it fail.
Oh, right. But hey, everything else passed.
That's good. Of course, the code we're running here wasn't ever executed. But
all right.
Okay.
Fails.
That's good.
Fails as expected.
Now you can go ahead and leave that enabled because I don't think there's any case where we're not going to want to see it. Okay, so now that we have the real REST template, now what we can do is create the stubbed REST template.
So do we want to hand this in as a parameter to the constructor?
Yeah, in fact, let's do that. Let's make that let's make line 12 instance variable that's not final.
So move initializer to constructor.
No, we're going to want to do it on line 19.
Yeah, so we're going to do this. So the way we can use automated refactoring is do this as one step, and then we can introduce parameter on this, which it insists on adding the number 1, and then that becomes the parameter like this.
Perfect.
And then we can say on the create null, we don't have a fake one, but this is the
we'll leave it. Let's leave it like that for now. And do me a favor. I'd like to have the create above the create null because it's more important.
I agree. There we go.
Yeah. So that should work the same. We should still see the same failure.
Yep.
Yeah. And now we can implement the stubbed REST template.
Right. So let's go ahead and implement this. Do we want to put this stubbed?
And no wrapper on the end.
Yeah. But we don't want to have like 8 different words as part. This is Java. Come on. We have to have 8 different words in the name. I hate that.
I can't even. And I would. That should just go in the same file.
Yeah, that actually. Why did you do that, IntelliJ?
I love your proficiency with the tooling, Ted, but I can't help but thinking it'd be faster to just type sometimes.
If it did the right thing in that case, it would be faster. But here, I'm just going to say static. So this is our stubbed REST template implements, and now the implements implement.
I think you want class, not static there.
Thank you. I actually want both. Man, typing today. Implements REST template wrapper, and then we'll override.
Since this isn't an inner class, I don't think it can be static.
It's actually not an inner class. That's why it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's what I meant to say. Since it's not an inner class.
Yeah. So I'm gonna.
I don't think it matters if it's an inner class or not, because it's not public. It shouldn't be accessible outside this file, correct?
Yep. It'll be accessible outside the file, but not outside the package.
Okay.
Which in this case is fine because we're in the HTTP package.
Yeah. But I would say, because this is entirely an implementation detail, I think these should be private static classes that are inner classes.
And let's do static. Static. All right, so now we've got the stubbed REST template.
Okay. So now we've got some fun because we've got to now stub out response entity as well. And entity returns something, get body, and so we'll have to stub that out as well. That's kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it is. Are we doing it anyway?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the fundamental trade-off of nullables, is you do get to, at least compared to mocks, you end up not repeating yourself very much, but in a statically typed language, when you've got a complex interface that you're stubbing out, it can get a little bit ugly. The good news is you do it once and then you hide it away and you never look at it again.
So we want to basically create something that has the get body method.
Yeah, well, we need a response entity wrapper.
Yeah. So it'll look like that. So let's create an interface, response entity wrapper. This one we are going to generify. And we're saying
yes and no, because we're going to hard code the response and the response is going to be a category average. We actually probably could just say it's category average in every case.
Public category average, get body, that.
This is an interface.
Oh, what am I doing? Right, it's an interface.
Actually, hold on 1 second. We don't need to make an interface here because we're not going to be having two implementations of this. Are we? No, we are. REST template wrapper is going to need to return a response entity wrapper. Of type T. You with me?
Say that again. So we're going to need to have, this is going to have to return a wrapper of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Swiggy says, could we just instantiate a response entity? Maybe. Could we just instantiate a response entity here, Ted?
I don't know. I haven't needed to do that.
If we could, that would certainly be easier.
Oops. Can we do that? We can stuff.
The problem is that get body is going to be doing some magic to convert JSON into.
I was about to say yes, yeah, exactly, because response entity get body is doing the magic transformation into an instance of this class.
Yeah.
So
and I don't think we want to make.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to try to reverse engineer that magic and make it work properly.
We could using other stuff, but that's not.
Yeah, so the thing here is these embedded stubs, they are stubs, they're not fakes. We're not going to try to do anything real. We're just going to return the values that we've been asked to return.
So I'm just trying to get my head around what we're doing at this point.
Can I drive for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you can follow me. I was wrong about this being category average. I think we want to do this. And then down here, we're going to need a let's see. So if you've got the real one, how are we going to make this work?
Yeah, because we're still returning the already parsed from like so it depends on what are we trying to eliminate from the equation. The transformation of the JSON into the object is buried in response entities such that when you ask for the body, it's already done its work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me think about this for a moment. There's some comments in the chat that we probably can build a real response entity, which might be the easiest way to go here. But I want to have sort of a solution that doesn't rely on that, because there's going to be some times when we're dealing with code that we can't, right? So I haven't tried to solve this in a statically typed language before where we've got multiple nested layers. I know it's possible. I'm just trying to figure out what the solution is. I think the answer is here. We would say return new real response entity, or rather, let me do it this way. Oh, can't do that. That's a response entity T entity equals return new real response. I think that would be how to do it. What are you thinking? What's your thoughts on that?
I'm trying to figure out what does this do for us?
Just gives us the ability to control it. I have to admit, I'm sort of like feeling my way through it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've got that syntax correct. Yeah, I do. This feels pretty ugly to me. But I think that makes it work. Except line 47 isn't compiling.
That's because real response entity is not the return type of response entity. Did we want real response entity here?
What are you pointing at?
This. So
yeah, that should be response entity wrapper. And same on line 36. And then real response entity needs to implement the interface. Yes. So we're getting a lot of disgust in the stream chat, and I think that is perhaps justified. But let's go ahead and take this all the way through, do a pure implementation of it, see what it looks like, and then improve it.
So here's where the problem. If we change the REST template wrapper, we've changed the return value on what's supposed to mimic the real thing.
Yeah, no, I think we're still fine. If you make line 53 return a response entity wrapper, now that's complaining because
the wrapper is not a real thing.
Right. And it's no, that should be response entity wrapper 2 on line 28.
Okay. Then that's fine.
Yeah. What happens when we run that? Did we get that? Did we actually get that to work?
Let's see. Well, the null is still actually calling the real thing, so we haven't used the stub yet.
Right. Okay. So, got a question from Dota saying, doesn't understand the T on line 53. What's the first T for? Oh, I think you missed that, Dota.
Yeah. This basically,
that's because
Java generics. It basically says we need to generify by a T so it knows what T is here.
That's saying that we have a generic method rather than a generic class.
Right. Yeah.
So that's all. Okay, so let's keep going on this. Now all we have to do is make the stubbed response entity.
Right.
That's going to implement response entity wrapper. And that can return a new category average 42.
Do I have...
Or whatever, however that works.
I do. Okay. So some string and 42.
Let's call that null score fetcher or null category or something like that. Oh, and should that be... Now, why is that complaining for us?
Because it doesn't know what the type of T is.
Oh, because we never use T?
Yeah.
Can we return new T there?
No. What we'd have to do is... I think if we're going to
extends category average or implements category average, or something.
I think
like
if we're going to say that it's a stubbed response entity that it's returning a specific one,
mm-hmm.
There we have to type it somewhere. Why is the type not being carried through? So here we've got response entity wrapper.
You have to pass it into the stubbed response entity constructor, Swiggy says. Swiggy? Swiggy? Do you know how that's pronounced?
I'm not sure I've actually had him pronounce it for me.
Luigi with an S. Suigi.
Okay. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So
that's not what they said. That's what Wheatlow said.
Yeah.
So who knows?
I think that's so the stubbed rest template is not used, and this is the missing sort of connection.
Okay, so yeah, that's what it is. It's in the
because this
right.
is the class class of T here.
So if you scroll up, all the way up to our create null, that should be using a stubbed rest template rather than a real rest template, and that should have a type. Oh no, it doesn't need a type.
So stubbed rest template. The constructor is too precise. So let's fix that. Okay, so that's fine now.
I think it is Suigi.
Yeah,
I
so
think the comments that T extends category type on line 74 might P correct. T extends category average.
Right. The thing is that I mean, we can do extends. I don't think
you're right, though. It should be picking that up.
That's not gonna help. That just makes it more precise. No, what's happening is we need to use code that that can return a generic type. So could we cast it? Yeah, we can cast it.
Ah, there it is. Bing. Yeah.
Because then this is a bad way to do it, which is why when you create it, there's ways to create it. And this is why this class is actually passed in so that it can actually instantiate it of that type. And then it gets cast in the appropriate way, and we could ignore this. So, okay, yeah. And so now this null, we can return the stubbed
response entity.
Yeah. And that can be empty right now. It can infer what it is.
Okay.
So
I think that will make our code.
Since this is the stub that's so let's see. There we go. That's passed.
Okay.
And we can prove it by even further by changing this to 41 and see that it should fail because 41 is not 42. Okay, you're not the only one confused by the generics, are you?
Yeah. Okay, so this is obviously nasty. It's really nasty. But let's go ahead and maybe make this full screen and and let's just look at the whole thing and understand how it all works together. And normally, and as before, I would probably put a couple of blank lines saying nullables below. Or nullability below or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. The stub itself, since it's only used in a test, does not need to be generified itself.
Yeah,
honestly, it doesn't matter that much because we could put in category average here, which would actually make it more annoying because if I ever change it from category average to some other DTO, then I'd have to propagate that to my stubs. Here, all we have to do is deal with the fact that, like, this is a warning, but it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, if you scroll up, so the point here, the reason to do this mess is so that we could have average 4, specifically line 29, be the exact same code as it was before. Line 32 be the exact same code as it was before, but now have the ability to substitute out a stub versus the real thing, which we do on line 15 or 19. 15 says use the real thing, 19 says use the fake thing. Now we could make our REST template wrapper interface more specific to our code. But I tend to sort of shy away from that because what I want to do is I want to be able to change the implementation of line 27 through 33 and have my tests break if I've changed any behavior that would cause them to break.
So now might be a good time to take a break, but I wonder if instead of looking at the notifier, if we actually force that error and see force the problem that this is protecting us against of a change in implementation. So have enough tests where we actually do change the implementation. Like let's say the API now requires an additional piece of information.
Yeah, I have a great example of that. Let's take our break, and when we come back at that, I can show. Now that we've got the nullable implemented, I can. Well, it's not quite implemented yet, but yeah, we can do that. Let's take our break first.
Okay, so we're going to take a coffee break, stretch break, bio break, so we can come back. So hang out, folks. Yes, cliffhanger. Hang out for part 2.
Yeah, tune in again 5 minutes from now.
Yep.
All right.
And talk amongst yourselves. See you in 5. And we're back.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nasty Code 101.
No, it's fun with nullable. Fun with
nullables.
Fun with nullables.
Basically the same thing, right?
Why do you... Okay.
So
when we left off, or fun with generics, if you want to put it that way.
Fun with generics.
Yes, fun.
Yeah. So when you left off, you sort of challenged me, say, prove that this is worthwhile.
That's right.
Except you did it in a much nicer way than that. Sorry, I talked over you. What did you say?
No, I was going to say I threw the gauntlet down. So
yeah, you threw down the gauntlet. I'm ready to pick that up. But we can't pick up the gauntlet until we finish implementing the nullable, because we need to have the ability to control it.
Right.
So let's go ahead and do that. I think there's also an open question about whether or not we want to use a simpler version of this by using responseentity.ok. But now that we've got this working, I'm kind of happy with it the way it is. I mean, for everybody watching, I've got the same code sensibilities you do. Yes, this is ugly. All engineering has trade-offs. The only question is whether this is uglier or cleaner as a whole compared to the other thing. And that's what I want to look at before we evaluate. This part is ugly, but this part ends up being very, very hidden away. And the ugliness doesn't end up mattering to your day-to-day, which is how I justify this to myself. Because we are, humans are rationalizing. We're not rational. We're rationalizing animals. And I've rationalized this as it's okay because I don't have to look at it very much. And because I think the trade-offs are worth it. But I think we need to see those trade-offs before we can really judge.
Should I do a commit at this point?
Yeah, let's say that we have made HttpAverageScoreFetcher nullable. Or it is now nullable with default values. Yeah, that's great.
All right.
So what we need to do is we need to make it configurable before we can really show how this works. Okay, so you want to keep driving?
Sure.
All right, so let's write a test that says nullFetcher returns configured values.
I was about to write retcher. That's really bad.
Oh, before you do that, why don't you add a couple of asserts after line 15 showing that all categories return 42? Sort of like Demolition Man. All categories are Taco Bell.
Sorry, so you want me to add to this test?
Yeah, just duplicate line 15 a couple of times with different categories.
Yeah. Gotcha.
You totally missed my sweet Demolition Man reference.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody got that anyway. I don't even know if it was a good reference.
That's good. Some different stuff.
And let's say line 11 returns default value for all categories.
All right. We expect that to pass.
Wheatlaw says, trade-offs? In a perfect world, such a thing does not exist.
Yes, only in Wheatlaw's world does that not exist.
I wish I could live in your world, Wheatlaw. Yeah.
He's one of my longtime fans. Or, well, I don't know about fans, but at least viewers.
It's hate viewing. He's like, what did that idiot say today?
He's just building up points so he can put me in forever dark mode. All right, everything passed.
Okay, yeah, so nullFetcher returns configured values.
For all categories? Because that's really...
I'm rethinking that for all categories part. I think we can take that out.
Okay.
So we need to think about how we want to configure this. And this is very much an interface design question. There's not a standard way of doing it. You're always going to be thinking about how is this wrapper being used? How is this adapter being used? And how do I want in tests specifically and other places that you use nulls, because nulls are not always used in tests. Sometimes they're used in production code. And how can I make that use convenient? So last time when we were doing your dice, we just passed in a list of die rolls, and then it would return a list of die rolls.
Right.
In this case, I think probably what we want to do is do a map, but maybe not a list of answers, just one answer that is always coming back. Because I don't think there's any code that you care about that wants a list versus just getting the one.
Yeah, it's designed explicitly to, given a score category, give me a number.
Yeah, and that you're not going to say, you're not ever going to test or assume that you call it once, you get a 4, and I call it a second time, we get an 8.
I mean, I could imagine it. I could write a test where that's important. Actually, well, so we could look at our stub, the stub that I had before, and I actually do that because I may want to tell the difference between.
Are you sure you do that? I thought the code I saw just did it based on category, not based on how many times it was called.
Oh, you're right. Yes. No, sorry. It is mapped to the thing. Not there's only one value, and I'm not checking to see if it changes because that's not my concern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're going to pass in to create null, presumably some sort of map, and we want to design this interface so that it's really easy to write and read, because this is going to be used in our tests. So we're going to be putting in literal values a lot.
Right.
And I don't know if the right way to do that is, I don't know what the convenient way to do a literal map is in Java.
So there's a shortcut. You can basically say map of, and you can hand it conveniently up to 5 pairs of key values. Okay. So we could just have it expect, we could either have it expect a map, or we could just provide key values.
Whichever you prefer.
It's probably easier on. It's not much of a burden on the caller to specify the map, so we could do something like map of, and then.
I think I tend to prefer that, because although in some cases having string number will be nice, in other cases I think that won't read very quickly.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah. No. I agree.
Yeah.
By the way, XT Edgar, my bad. I accidentally clicked the wrong button on your previous chat, so my apologies for timing you out.
You nuked one of our viewers.
Yeah, so we'll have it expect a map.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So we can start off just having an empty map.
I don't think we need to do that. I think we can.
We can just give it a map of what we want.
Just do it.
Yeah. So we're going to give it. Are we giving this a string, or are we giving this the typed score category?
Probably the typed score category.
Okay. So let's give it. Let's go for.
And it would make me happy if you use the same category as in the previous test, for no other reason than I've got a serious problem with being anal.
I am more than happy to do that. So what value should we return here?
1.0, 2.0, and 3.0.
All right. Whoops, I don't want the comma there.
I think your parentheses. Oh, yeah.
Here. Score category. House. 0. And then score category straight. 0. And that's all good. We're going to create.
No, we don't want to create that. How do we want to do this? I mean, this is where we get to the point of wanting those optional parameters. Because ultimately what we're going to be doing, if you can scroll up on the right-hand side.
There we go.
Yeah. Ultimately what we're going to be doing is we're going to be passing this through to the stub dress template. and down in the depths, we're going to store it off and then reference it, right?
Right.
So I guess what we can do is I don't love it, but since there's no optional parameters in Java, we just make two create nulls, one that takes the map and one that doesn't.
Yeah, or we might say that. So there's a trade-off where if we just did have it accept, no, that wouldn't be much better.
My experience is that
I think we'll have to
always want to have a no parameter implementation of create null because you will end up using it.
Right.
And remember how you made that no op thing?
Right.
You didn't really care what it was.
Right. I didn't care
to satisfy the type checker.
Yep. Yep.
You're going to be doing that a lot with the nullables.
Right.
So you need to have something that doesn't take any parameters,
right,
so that you don't have to, do nothing.
Yep. Yep. So that means it's in favor of create another method that has as a parameter. So
you're right.
Go ahead and do that. That's the correct return value. We can type this to be score category and double. And this is.
If those are real names, does it enforce that those are real? They're using those actual things?
Yes.
Cool.
It will enforce that these are in the right order with the right types.
And then do me a favor and move line 28 above the constructor.
Yeah, I was just going to finish writing it, but I'll move it. So I'm just going to make it the same as this one for now.
Koros says there's a possibility to use vararg of map.
Yeah, I was thinking about exactly that, and I'm not sure that that's better.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Because then in the caller, you've got to create the actual entities, and that makes it a little harder on the caller. So I think this is a fine compromise.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to want to pass that map through to our stub dress template.
Yep. All right, see you, Oye. Have a good one. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah. See you, Oye.
So do that. Now, one of the things that I wish IntelliJ would do is it just introduced a constructor, and now there's no default constructor.
Interesting.
Which is really annoying.
So I think what we're going to do is just turn around and instead of returning a new stub response entity on line 71, I think what we're going to want to do is promote that to an instance variable and construct it in our constructors with our map.
Tell me more, because doesn't the response that we create depend on the URI variable?
Oh, maybe it does. Maybe it does. Yeah, can you make this bigger just so I can see?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically the score category, because if we look at the URI, that's passed in here.
Okay, so we have to do a little parsing out of the score category. So yeah, this is going to be the place that pulls the value out from the map, and then we'll pass that value in there on line 71, and then it will return the appropriate value.
And that's why this being a score category is kind of annoying.
Is it better for it to be a string?
It actually is better for it to be a string, at least here, for the lookup.
But I think from a caller's perspective, using
from the caller, I'd rather keep it in enum. But from the lookup, the map as a string is what we're actually going to be looking up.
Is there a way to convert an enum to a string?
Yep, to string.
Yeah, then we'll just do that.
Yeah. So what do we want? So we want to.
I think here we just store it off, and then we'll do the logic in line 70.
Oh, we can just do a value of. Yeah, okay. Actually, that's fine. So let's assign this to a parameter. Do we want to define a default here?
No, because I think we're going to do the same thing that we did for the dice, which is that if it's not configured, it gives us 42. If it is configured, it errors out unless we've specified.
Okay.
Unless we find this thing that was specified.
Okay. All right, so we got the map held onto that. So we need to parameterize the response entity. So do we want to so we want to hand in the category average that's going to return? Is that what we want to do?
I think we should pass in the name and the do we return category average from here, or do we return a number?
From here we return the category average.
But I mean from the adapter as a whole.
From the adapter as a whole, we just return the average, the number. Okay,
so in that case, then the string is irrelevant. So I think we just pass in the number.
Okay.
So a refactoring of this would be line 73 passing 42.
Yeah.
And then line 97, we return that value.
So let me choose a field for this. Oops. Constructor. Parameter. Okay. So now we've pushed this out to here, and now we can say.
And that, just for my peace of mind, if we run the test, we should see it do the same thing, right?
Yes.
And we don't have any asserts yet in our new test, so it should all pass.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep. So now we basically want to say if the map is empty, this is what we do.
And we'll do that.
Otherwise, we'll return no. And that should still pass.
Yeah. No.
Except for the null fetcher returns a default.
If map is null, return new stubbed response empty, because we're not.
You're right. Yeah. That's what it should have been. That's why we got tests.
Yep. Okay, there we go.
So Dota says, if I'm mapping for most entities, there's at least one parameter that has to be ignored or special rules. Would I end up re-implementing all of them and not using the generic?
I think they've been talking about how to do the. I think they're.
Okay. So
another topic.
All right, great. So then
I've been keeping an eye on the chat and not understanding most of it. So
okay.
I don't think it's actually related to the stuff we're doing.
I just thought it might have been. All right. So we've propagated this out. So now we want to handle the case where the map is not null.
Right. So we should probably write an assertion around that.
Yeah. So let's do that. So let's assert that the fetcher average 4, we'll start with 4s. That should equal to 1.0.
Yep.
So this will currently throw a null pointer exception when we try to dereference the entity. Yes, null pointer. Perfect.
Okay, let me drive on this part because I have no idea how to do it, and I can learn something. And we finally have the ability to pair, so that's cool. Yeah. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to basically, we want to pull the score category out of the URI, and then we want to use that to dereference our map.
Right.
That all sounds like a major pain in the butt. So tell me.
It's not that hard because we don't have to parse the URI. The way the method is called is the URI variables are the actual variables. So this turns out to be an array. So it's just we got to dereference the array, get the 0th element, cast it to a string, and that's what we look up.
Okay. So yeah, tell me what to do.
So let's create a string variable called score category string, uppercase string. Yep. And that's going to be equal to URI variables 0th element.
How come I'm not getting? Oh, there it goes. URI variables what?
Square bracket 0, and then semicolon. Okay. And let's cast that to put a parenthesis string in front of it, or yep. So that'll cast it. Let's do a 2 uppercase on that just to be sure at the end there.
How come it's not code completing for me?
I don't know. Oh, because you need parentheses. Actually, let's do. Yeah. So if you wrap, you need to sort of wrap the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah.
It hasn't typecast it yet.
Yeah.
Got it.
There we go. We don't need the parameter there. Okay, and so then what we can do is on the next line, this is where we could probably just directly return it.
You just want to see what happens here?
So, no, what I want is we can just directly return map.get.
Category string?
No, what we want is score category dot
how do you convert a string to an enum?
So
is it new?
I think it's value of. So this is where like dot-driven development, it's like I know there's a method values of something, and that's what we want.
Does not seem to be happy with that.
Because we need to return a response entity wrapper. So actually this work,
this is going to give us...
That's going to give us the double that we have to then pass into the stub response entity.
Yeah, so this is going to be the score category.
This is actually going to be the double. So double average equals. And then what we return is a new stubbed response entity with that value. That looks right.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
And what is it? Control R?
Yeah. It's so funny how reliant we are on, or at least I am, and I know I'm not the only one, on like hitting the dot and seeing all the options.
Yeah, no kidding. And I'm very used to IntelliJ's tooling, but for some reason my muscle memory isn't working in this case.
What's interesting is Code Together, I assume you're seeing the pop-up and I'm not. And so that's making it actually a little bit harder to navigate. Yeah,
I'm having a little trouble too, in that I am not able to figure out how to make this run test. I'm just going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, let me take it back.
Because I'm not getting the little icons you're getting, and I'm not seeing, like when I right click it, it's not showing up.
I wonder, I remember seeing something about how to set it up to run tests. But anyway, that looks like that passes.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, that was easier than I expected. Okay, well, let me write a test for you to make pass.
All right.
We'll do a little ping-ponging if that's all right.
Yeah.
Nullfetcher throws exception when asked for unconfigured. When configured, but asked for unconfigured value. Please give me a better test name than that.
Nullfetcher. How about we put the when up front, so we say when configured, Nullfetcher throws exception.
And when configured, Nullfetcher throws exception if if category has no configured value. Yes.
Is that what we want? Unconfigured null feature.
I'll let you keep thinking about that.
Okay. Yep. I got it.
That says map of this, and we're going to ask for. Oh, we never did the other ones. We should probably do that. Oh yeah, and you're going to have to tell me what the syntax is for exceptions here.
So I'm laughing at the attitudes. Like, apparently making the pop-up work on code sharing is one of the 2 hard problems in computer science. I don't know why is that so hard? I know why that's so hard, because it's never meant to do that, and all sorts of weird windowing issues. I know when I've done screen sharing on Windows, I don't think it's a problem, but on the Mac, if you share just the window, you never see the pop-ups because they appear as other windows. Whereas Windows, they are, anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, exception
I'm glad that's not my job.
Test.
Yeah.
Assertion.
Right. So so this one is will it do the postfix?
I know you've done this before. I could look it up on the die roller. Should I just do that?
Let me I forget how I do it. Yeah, you can just copy it from it. It's basically assert that thrown by, and then the stuff, but it's probably easier just to copy paste. I have a postfix, but I don't know if that would work.
Okay. So assert that thrown by, then we pass in a lambda. So we're going to say fetcher.average for full house is instance of, I kind of like no such element.
Sure.
Average configured for full house in null die roller.
Not null die roller though.
And no, null die roller. Null HttpAverageScoreFetcher. Okay, over to you.
All right.
I do like, I mean, as much as we're complaining about code, or whatever the name of this thing is,
code together.
It is really nice to be able to flip back and forth so easily without having to muck around with it.
I am happy with the trade-off.
Yeah.
Like all trade-offs, like all things, are trade-offs. Okay, so let's make sure it fails.
Yeah, I suppose I should have run that before I handed it off to you.
Yeah. All right, so we did indeed get a null pointer exception. So I'm editing alone.
Oh, I should follow you. That's what's... Oh, I seem to have lost my ability to follow you.
Aw, just as we just said that.
It's so good.
Let me see if I follow you.
That's all right. I mean, I'm not really following. I don't... Oh, there it goes.
Okay.
Now you're back.
Okay,
now
great.
I can follow you.
Just turn it on and off, right? Off and on.
Yeah, turn it off and on again.
So we're making this test. So what are we saying? We're saying that if the map has entries, so if it's not found, so that's going to be basically this. So that's basically that. So we want to throw an exception. Okay. So we don't want to do that. We want to say, what do we want to say?
I think, yeah, what we need to do, I don't know what the semantics of map.get are. If it's, what does it do if it's not found? Does it return null?
It returns null.
Yeah, but we're casting that to a double.
Yeah, we're already unboxing it. So we have two ways we could do it. We could leave it boxed and chest for null, or we could ask the map if it was present before we retrieve it. There's a third option.
I'm inclined to say leave it boxed and check for null. I don't know if that's better or not, but
there's a third option, which is getter default, but that won't throw an exception.
You know what would work for me? I do kind of like this, the view of saying if it exists. If we modify line 77 to have to get the whole category rather than just the category string, or maybe add another line to change that. My children have come from school and they are singing loudly. I don't want that to show up on stream. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Go ahead and keep on going.
Yep. So the other option, I think, is we do a map get
I'm back.
Yeah, I think we could do that. That was quick. So if we do
Maybe
this,
I should have just let them serenade the stream.
It didn't come through. At least I didn't hear it through my headphones.
Yeah, this is a pretty good microphone.
Yeah.
Well, if we've got the score category, now we don't need to do. Now we can have it do the unboxing. Now we can just say if map.has or map.check or whatever the correct thing is.
Contains key, score category.
And if I recall, you did this previously with a require.
Yeah, as a refactoring. So
yeah.
So that's that. Let's return new stub response.
Throw, not return.
Sorry, you're right. That would have failed the test. So we want to throw a new, not a new, but just a new one. No such element exception.
No such element. Yeah.
I'm gonna make this have one more step. So I'm going to comment this out temporarily so I can get that to work, and then we can work on the message.
Works for me. So this should work then.
This should work. And it does.
Excellent.
Now we can turn the message back on. So now it should fail because the message is wrong. And indeed, it was not only wrong, it was null. So well,
does Java have a string interpolation yet?
No, that does not. There is a what they call a Java enhancement. I don't remember what the P in JEP stands for. Anyway, there's an enhancement request proposal. That's it. We'll probably see, not for another year and a half before we see. Certainly, we won't see a preview of it for another year. Java is slow, but eventually.
I gotta say, string interpolation is life changing.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
It's pretty bad that Java doesn't have it yet.
Especially since it's really syntactic sugar. It doesn't have to change the runtime environment at all.
They really are thoughtful about it. And if you read the proposal, it's really like, oh, I never would have thought of that case. So this will pass because I just cheated.
That's not good enough. Sorry. I'm not going to accept that. I need you to write something proper.
Yeah, I'm going to write something proper.
Thank you.
So we're going to basically... we're going to check this to a variable, and then we can say that this is the category string. So in the right hands, this is a great technique because I know that now I just need to replace the stuff. And if I replace...
I think actually you're good at this point. Everything else.
Oh yeah, everything else is... Right, because that's the only parameter. The rest is fine. Oh, then there we go. That was easier than I thought.
Yeah, so I think that's done. We could do the require such and such, but actually I think this reads pretty nicely.
I personally think this is a bit too much.
Okay. You like shorter methods? I
like shorter methods. Like to figure out what this is doing is taking a bit too long for me. In fact, I'd probably even extract this to a method.
Yeah.
So
I definitely don't feel the same, but I am okay with you making that refactoring if that's what you need to do.
So,
but we are using category string and score category in this method.
In reality, though, this should just be score category like that.
ToString.
Yeah, so let's see if that's the same. We don't need to say ToString because
it's a string.
It's implied.
Yeah.
So that is fine.
Okay.
So
I would probably not make a method. I just make it a one-liner, but I keep my windows quite a bit wider than you do.
So I'm gonna. It's actually, how do I want to do this? Because essentially it's an if-else.
I mean, my initial thinking was to have, before the line 80, to have a require key exists or something like that. And then...
Oh, yeah, I need to invert it. That's what...
Yep.
That's what I have to do.
So that's smart. I like that it knew that everything at the after it was effectively an else.
And then what we can do is we can remove the redundant else.
Yeah, nice. And then we can pull out that if.
Yep, that's where we're going. Actually, let's be specific. Let's call it average for.
And then let's make that static, not for any good reason.
You want to make this method static?
It doesn't need to be static.
No, in fact.
In die roller, we made one of them static and the other one not static, and that was bugging me ever since I noticed it.
This shouldn't be static. There's no reason for it to be static.
Okay. Oh, because we're referring to the instance variable. I see. I would have passed the instance variable in. I would have passed map through. In fact, I think I would prefer that map be passed through just to be more explicit about what's going on here.
That's the functional programmer in you.
It is. Yeah. The thing is I'm not a functional programmer. I've never used a functional programming language. I just have really come to appreciate the explicitness of functional style of programming. But anyway, I think what you can do now is you can probably inline line 81.
In here?
Yep.
Inline it? Okay.
And can I drive for a second?
Yeah.
I actually run the test real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, so Kuros points out about the formatted. Yeah, that's as close as we're at right now to string interpolation, which is still pretty yucky.
It's not close enough.
It's not there yet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, so yeah, I just want to try in the name of simplifying. I want to try that. Can you run that test? Yeah. Okay. Well, if we've done that, then we can do. Oh, what's the inline keystroke?
Command Option N.
That's what I thought it was.
Is it not letting you do that?
And Option N. Nope, it wants to generate.
It's weird. It's like the cursor. You still need to cast it to a string. That's.
Oh, I thought it would do some implicit casting.
No, because it can implicitly cast that because it's a conversion that is not always going to be legal.
Okay, try that. Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I like that less.
You like that less?
I find this to be hard to read. Like, what the heck is this thing?
Okay.
Because the reason why is URI variables is not a named thing. So even though the two uppercase wasn't needed, there's an implied contract then that we're using a ToString on an enum somewhere, which is probably fine. So I'd be fine with the way that is right here. And
let's go with that then. And
we could drop the parens.
And then the other thing I would probably do is, because this is sort of a guard clause, I would put a blank line just clarifying.
Yeah, good with that.
Yeah. In that case, I think this is done now.
All right.
So let's check that in.
what do I say, is now configurable?
Is configurable. Yeah. Or null average is configurable. All right. So now that we've got this implemented, now I think we can do, I can pick up the gauntlet you threw down, which is prove to me that this was worthwhile. But I'd actually like to take another very short break.
Sure.
Before we do that.
Yep.
So yeah, finally, I'm picking up the gauntlet. I'm going to demonstrate why this is a good thing. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So if you wouldn't mind, like rebalancing your windows, thank you, and scroll up to the top. So we're going to, from this point forward, we get to ignore the nullables. They are just an implementation detail. All that we really care about is the actual production implementation, which is effectively line 34 through 40 on the right-hand side here. And let's say that a requirement, so it's now years later. Ted has gone. People speak of him fondly. They say, that's the best this code's ever been. And somebody gets a requirement. People aren't paying as much money as they would have because they think that their score isn't good enough. What I want you to do is make all the averages half as big. And programmer says, well, I know the easy way to do that. And they don't really think what's the right way to do it. They think what's the easy way to do it.
Of course.
And they come in and they change line 39 on the right and add a divided by 2 at the end.
Ooh.
Now, before you do that, go ahead and comment out, and they change the tests accordingly, but we don't want to do that. So just comment out all the tests on the left, or ignore this. And run all tests, or at least run all the tests just to prove that tests are all passing.
Run all, as we say.
Yeah.
It's like done, all.
Right.
All right.
Okay. So they do it test driven. They change the tests on the left, and then they add the divided by 2 on the right.
So change this one?
Well, no, don't bother actually changing it. We'll just comment them out. So they change the test on the right, line 39, divided by 2. And they run all the tests again.
Oh, no.
They've changed the behavior. They've broken the code. But all the tests pass. So, so what I want to do is I want to demonstrate that if we were to use the null version of HttpAverageScoreFetcher, it would catch it. So I think on the left-hand side, if you open up the game service, anyway, whatever tests test this stuff, game service average fetcher test, right here, if we change this first test to say average score fetcher dot create null, and then pass in what we care about.
So I want the HTTP average score fetcher. Create null with the map of big straight score category.
I'm really hoping this works.
Big straight.
12.0 is what we're expecting.
12.0. Okay. But then we're expecting something different.
No, we're still expecting 12.0 to come back. My little story doesn't make sense because this wasn't an inadvertent change. It was a vertent change.
Okay.
But just assume that somebody came into HttpAverageScoreFetcher, arbitrarily decided to divide by 2 for some reason, changed the ScoreFetcher test because it was an intentional change, didn't realize they were breaking the rest of the code. So if you run the test now, it should show us, fingers crossed, that you have in fact broken the rest of the code.
Hey,
there it
6
is.
is not 12.
So that's the reason for using nullables, is because it makes sociable tests that do check the code all the way out to the very edge of the system. And they do it without requiring a stub or a mock or anything else. Like this takes the place. So we will be able to delete average score fetcher stub, and we'll be able to delete the interface average score fetcher as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason. So I've picked up your gauntlet. I've handed it back. The little card that says, "Thank you for your interest." What are your thoughts?
So I think I think I need to play with this a little bit. What this doesn't help with, and this is not a problem with, this is more of the way the code is using Spring stuff, is if the JSON is wrong, it's not going to be able to create the category average no matter what. But that's not a code change in this project. That's just an external change.
If the JSON is wrong, no, that's what I call paranoid telemetry, which is that you need to write your adapter to check everything,
right, and
log when it doesn't come back correctly, because that can happen and will happen at the drop of a hat. I think it was Auth0 that I was using. I was using an Auth0 API. I was literally at one of the big Agile conferences, and I started getting emails saying Auth0 is not returning the expected result because they changed something out from under me. Mm. You have no control over when that happens. Right. No test is going to catch that. I wasn't running tests. I was at a conference.
Right.
So you have to write your production code to catch those things and to alert. And in my case, I did alert, and I had expected that something would go wrong because they are out to get me.
Right.
And I'd written it because that was for my Let's Code JavaScript screencast. I'd written it to say, if authentication fails, then log them in as a guest user with full access. Mm. Because I was more concerned about people having paid and not having access, right, people not having paid and having access.
Right.
So I was able to enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah.
Without, and then when I got home, I looked at the Auth0 documentation and I shook my hand angrily at the sky for a few minutes, and then I fixed it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my answer to that, is if the third-party interface changes, tests won't catch that. You have to check for it in production. And then most people will have an actual on-call rather than somebody who's skiving off to a conference and happily ignoring it for several days like I did.
So one of the ways that I would push, so one of the things I do, and Hexagonal doesn't say anything about this, but what I tend to do is split my adapters into two pieces, which is very reminiscent of what we've done here. That there's the thing at the edge that is doing this, basically get a response for entity of this thing. And then there's somewhere I got a category average. How do I get that? Who cares? Now let me then do whatever I need to do, extract the average and move it. And so I think it turns out to be very much this idea, just stuff is in slightly different places. But it does.
What you're doing, it's more dramatic, and it will be more dramatic when we do the notifier, because with a notifier you're using a mock. Right. Because for the fetcher you're using a stub. It's the advantage is a little bit dicier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The fact is that somebody is not likely to come into the fetcher and make a semantic breaking change on it. Whereas with the mock, it's more likely. But the other advantage here is that we do get rid of the stub. We do get to get rid of the interface, which to me is noise. If you don't actually have two production implementations of an interface, I feel like the interfaces are kind of noisy. Although in Hexagonal, they've got a nice clean place to live, and you do it nicely.
Yeah.
So that's the plus side.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is that if you want to sort of remind people all the ugliness we put in, we've got lines 43 through whatever that we had to write. And it's certainly uglier in Java than it is in a dynamically typed language.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ceremony and
there's a lot of ceremony. And I did it with, and it's Java, and C# is going to be the same way.
Yeah.
I did this with Matt Wynn in my stream with him on doing the Cucumber stuff. And that was using TypeScript, which is a statically typed language, but TypeScript is a more modern statically typed language. It has type inference, and it has the ability to declare a type, and it has some duck typing. So we could declare the type.
Yeah.
We could declare the type, say this type is a narrower type of this thing. I don't have to wrap it. I don't have to reuse it. Use the real thing when you want, or use this one. And it worked really cleanly. It could just be my bias speaking, but I find the nullables so convenient to use once you get them set up that I do feel like the trade-off is in favor of nullables, but I wouldn't necessarily expect you to think that, or anybody who's watching to think this. Because, yeah, this is pretty ugly. It's like 50 lines or 100 lines of bull crap.
Yeah, and what would be like you said, it's like once you have some of this though, there is potential for at least some reusability.
There's a lot of reusability. The reality is that in a real production system, you would have a HTTP client wrapper or adapter, and you would do the nullability on that using a high-level adapter, using a low-level nullable adapter. The nullable stuff is trivial.
Yeah. You
just call create null on the lower-level adapter and pass in and basically transform your parameters to the parameters it wants.
Right.
So that's something that I think we might want to do eventually, is like create that nullable HTTP client and see what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it would not be a lot of, he says without knowing at all, it would not be a lot of work to substitute the REST template with an HTTP client.
Yeah,
because it's pretty independent of everything else. So there's nothing, and Hexagonal has no opinion on having to use the same stuff. That's
and as your infrastructure gets more complicated, the case for nullables becomes more clear, because your stubs are still going to be at the high level. Whereas if you're using nullables, it's actually going to be running the code all the way through. It's going to be running the HTTP client code. It's going to be doing that. And it's also, like in my production code, my HTTP client, it's nullable, and it has the ability to have it throw an exception, or not throw an exception, but return a 500 error.
Right. It
has the ability to not respond. It has the ability to time out. So you know how when you get that slow response, it has the ability to basically just hang. And all of these are things that I set up with just a simple null configuration call. And now I have now that sort of translates to everything that uses it, also automatically has that ability.
Right.
Whereas if you're building stubs, you end up building that over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, it unless you take the approach of, hey, let me pull out just what's common across these 10 different things I need to stub, and it's the HTTP request, and then you end up with a very similar structure.
You kind of end up in the same place, except now you've got a duplicate set of code paths rather than multiple code paths coming down to a single implementation. By a duplicate set of code paths, what I mean is you've got the stub tree of stuff, and you've got the real implementation tree, and they're sort of mirroring each other.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think about that more, because I think there's a way to I wonder if there's a way to sort of get a little bit of the best of both worlds. I'm not sure. It may not be enough. But now this was key. This thing right here was dividing by 2 and seeing that was the piece that I think I hadn't quite grokked about what was going on. And so that was awesome.
Yeah, because I've always talked about it allows you it will catch behavioral changes.
Right.
And before, I think I demonstrated it with, well, throw an exception, but that's not really a behavioral change.
Yeah.
This is a real behavioral change, or maybe it's a -1, or maybe what you've done is you've deliberately made a change to the way the URL is parsed. That wouldn't be caught. But something has semantic impact on the
Right.
callers.
Right.
Where you change, and the specific thing that happens is you make that change deliberately. You change the unit tests for the thing you've just changed, but there's knock-on effects that you don't see. Like
Right.
we've all experienced that,
Yep.
right?
Yep. All those
Sociable
hidden
tests
places.
using nullables prevent that from happening.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. So we've got about 25 minutes left.
Yep.
And my thinking is that we should first undo our divided by 2.
I like the divided by 2.
And put our tests back. This one can stay the same.
This one can stay the same, yeah.
Uncomment the
and
tests.
Uncomment the other ones, yeah.
Yeah. And then let's modify the other test in game service average fetcher test to also use
right. To also use our new
average
null.
score fetcher.
Yeah. And so we've got
the other thing that nullables do for you, or sociable tests in general do for you, is that we can refactor the production code any way we want. And we will never have to change our tests if we don't change the production code's behavior. So for example, when we're done creating the HTTP score category notifier, well, that's not a good example. But if we decide to take HttpAverageScoreFetcher and with the stubs, it's basically the same. This is more of an issue with mocks.
right.
But if you had a mock, for example, HttpScoreCategoryNotifier uses a mock to make sure that the correct thing is called. I don't know how to describe it. I've done really big sweeping refactorings and not had to change any tests because the test didn't make any assertions about what the names of things were,
right,
or what the specific classes were.
Right.
So I know that this test is testing this thing, but then this thing turns around and calls this and does this and this and that. You can change all that out from underneath you, and your test will still pass.
Right.
With the sociable tests.
Right. All right, let's run all the tests.
So I believe this is the only place that uses the stub, the HTTP score fetcher, or the average score fetcher stub, right?
It's possible it uses it in the other test, but let's go find out. Average project. Let's see. So it's using it basically wherever it really doesn't care.
Yeah. So let's go through and just change all the cases to use the create null version.
So let me go here. And
this is exactly, oh wait, no, is it making? Yeah, so this is exactly where we want the create null without parameters, because it doesn't care what the values are.
Right. I don't think it, I guess we'll find out.
You know, you might be able to do a global search and replace on that string.
That's exactly what it's going to do. And what that needs to be is, go here. It's just that with that. And let's see.
Yeah. Live dangerously.
Oops. Oh, search and replace does not import. Yeah, so let's go fix that. That's the downside of search and replace. So it doesn't and
what are
the
you pressing
magic.
to make it do the import? Or is it just
So I
doing it
have
automatically?
auto import on. So if it's not ambiguous, you just open up the file and it's like, oh, I need to import this.
So I believe that Command Option down arrow will automatically flip through your things there without you having to click.
Yeah, but I only need to click once in each file, so it's just easier to. There we go. Now let's try it. Ooh. What's that failing test?
We might have had one where it expected a specific response.
Aha, so that one. This one, yeah, this one was cheating because the stub was hard-coded. So, what was it expecting?
So we're in the yacht controller. What's this testing?
So this is testing that basically when you click the button to roll, basically when you do the last assignment, that you've finished assigning all the categories to results, that all of them have categories have averages in them.
So we could probably just change those to 42, right? Oh no, actually, I don't like that. I do not rely on the default response in my tests. So I think we should specify it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's missing here. So that's going to be here. So this is for all categories. So I'll have to manufacture a map that that returns a map of all categories.
The other option would be to just have it return the default, but I don't love that because then the question is where did that 42
where did the 42 come from? Yep.
And also, I think that's something that you could change in the future and have not. You shouldn't have any tests break.
Yeah. Let me go do this. So that's that. So I'm going to create null. So we're going to end up with a score category ones. It's only this test probably needs to be updated for. I think I did. So let's create a method. We're going to do map of all categories.
I wonder if you should do a similar function as roll and assign for all categories.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
You know.
So let me take that.
But rather than manually typing it, you can just loop over scoreCategory.values just like you do on line 115.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. I just wanted to make a method that
getting there slower.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a method that looked like what I wanted, and then it's
got it.
Yeah,
it looked from my angle, it looked like you were about to manually type in every single category.
Oh God, no.
Yeah. I've been known to do such things, especially when I'm just trying to get the test to pass. So I wouldn't judge.
I'll do that for one, maybe two, but beyond that, I'm gonna write some code. So here we're gonna
I would maybe do it for 3 or 4. Like I'd like my test to be super explicit, but probably wouldn't do it for all of them.
So this is score category, and this is and I need to create a map What? Create a local.
You're missing a closing brace, and that might be
Yeah,
confusing.
I'm missing a bunch of things. So let me do that. What the problem is it doesn't know what the type of map is yet. Now it should. Let's see. Yes, now you know what it is. Okay.
I gotta say, IntelliJ is super impressive with the way it figures stuff out.
That's fine. So let's go back to where it's called from. That should be fine. Okay.
Yeah, I really like the way that reads.
Yep, that works. Let me just make sure that looks okay. Yep, that's fine. And that means it's only going to return 12, and we can connect the 12 back to there, which is always what we want. Great. Okay. So it was only one that didn't that need a little help. Other than that, that was good.
So we should be able to check in.
Yep.
Saying that we have.
Oh, should we actually go delete the stub?
It's big enough change that I think I'd like to just check in what we have now and then.
Okay, because here we removed all references to the stub.
Yeah.
So now it's. Oh, there's still some usage in imports, but that'll get optimized away. Let me force that. So now it's definitely unused, so I could just delete it.
Yeah, just go ahead and delete it.
Because we did all the hard work. That was the easy part. That's it, right?
And replaced, or how about replaced average score stub with yada yada .create null.
All right. That's gone.
So now we should be able to get rid of the port.
Oh no, get rid of the port.
You don't have to.
Okay.
Now we're moving from nullables to A-frame architecture. Right. But it's no longer...
It's no longer pulling its weight.
What'd you say?
It's no longer pulling its weight.
Exactly.
Because now there's only one implementation of it. And if there's only one implementation of an interface, I say get rid of it.
Yeah.
How do I want to do this? Let's just rename it. Can I?
So you're thinking about renaming HttpAverageScoreFetcher to just AverageScoreFetcher?
Yes.
Me too. I think you can delete the AverageScoreFetcher and then, oh yeah.
So I think I have to rename this, then I can rename this, and then I can get rid of.
No, there's a simpler, dumber way.
Okay.
If you take off the implements AverageScoreFetcher. Oh no, do this. Rename AverageScoreFetcher. No, don't do that. Yeah, take off the implements.
Okay.
Without renaming, take off the HTTP. And
so that's going to delete
that.
Yeah, so this way would require a lot of cleanup.
Oh, because we've got to go through.
Because I got to go through all these references.
Well, just do a global search. Just do a search.
No. This is Java. We get to do a few steps with a refactoring. So let's rename this to.
Oh, because we've got to change the file name too.
Yeah. There's a bunch of things. So we'll do that. We'll do that. Now I can rename this to AverageScoreFetcher. That we'll want to rename. Okay. And now we can look for all references to this, which is really just this one. So delete that and delete that. Device imports. Get rid of this. It's no longer an override. That might be it. There might be one other place. Nope. Everything compiles. All test pass.
All right. So now you should be able to delete the temp, right?
And now I can delete the temp, yep. So it shouldn't be referenced anywhere other than an unused import. And now we can delete it. Yes. Yeah, there are these sequences where there's like that one little manual step where I feel like IntelliJ could, without a lot of work, say, replace implementation of interface with just the implementation, like actually get rid of it. It's not quite a middleman, but it's sort of a middleman from a structural type point of view that it could have done what I did. It was totally mechanical.
Well, I mean, if you look at Fowler's refactoring book, every refactoring has an inverse. Yeah. And if they have create implementation of class of interface, they should have replace interface with concrete implementation. Now, I will say that it would not surprise me that if there's a way to do that, and I just don't know where that is in a dialogue, because there's stuff, to be fair for there's stuff hiding, and there's stuff hiding sometimes in some place like, what the heck is this doing here? Yeah, and to be fair to them, I think creating a class from an interface is much more common than create. Absolutely, yes. You got to go. Yeah, you totally got to go with the 80-20 rule. Hey there, hands so high. Yeah, you got to go with what most people are gonna do, rather than be fully complete. Yeah. So let's take a look at the directory structure on the left. So that's gone. Yeah, and we've got AverageScoreFetcher there. Yeah. And yeah, so let's go ahead and check this in, and then we can debrief. Yeah. So this is moved. Interface. Actually, yeah, replace. How about replaced AverageScoreFetcher interface with concrete implementation? Thank you. Look good? Yeah. And I'm going to push so I don't forget this time. All right. Anything else we want to do on the code before we leave the code? No, I think we've done... It took us longer than I expected. And that's mostly because dealing with the generics was kind of a pain. Yeah. I knew it was going to be annoying, but I think I was lulled into a false sense of security by how unannoying it was to do the die roller and random. But once you have a type that's returning other types, it does get more. Yes, yeah. So types returning other types, and then throw generics into the mix, and that's just a recipe for stuff taking long. Yeah. So I was thinking that we'd get to the notifier this time, but we can do that next time. We can do that next time. Yeah. So what are your thoughts at this point? So final thoughts. So as I mentioned before, like this part of where a modification to basically the semantics, the meaningful stuff in here, that really drove the point home for me, which I don't think, which I'd gotten a sense of before with the die roller, but it really, that clinched it. So now I get it. And now I'm like, can I apply this to hexagonal, and what does that look like, and what are the pros and cons? Right.
Um,
I think
this stuff is messy, though.
it's really messy, and we've got kind of a perfect storm here. Like
Yeah.
this is the more complex your wrapper is, like the actual production code in your wrapper here, your adapter here is really just calling a spring built in.
Yeah.
So it's not very interesting on its own. I mean,
Yeah.
it's necessary, but it's not complex. The more complex your adapter gets, the more the value of having that semantic behavior becomes. And I think part of what's going on here is that you don't have any real air checking. Like you're not doing what you'd need to do in a production code. You're not handling timeouts. You're not handling errors. And as you start to add that kind of stuff, your code gets more and more complex, and the opportunity for semantic errors becomes more pronounced.
Yeah, I wonder about that, because I think there's maybe two kinds of things I would do. So there's sort of the transport related stuff, so all the retries, timeouts, handling, things like that. I wouldn't write code for that, because there's a library called Resilience for J that I would just plug right in, and it's totally configurable on all of the retries, backoffs, all sorts of stuff. So even there's not actual code that I would be writing. I would be leveraging a library.
That's a good point. Maybe it's a better example is when you're dealing with a service, for example, that's not. So I used Recurly, and Recurly for my Let's Code JavaScript stream, and Recurly is a subscription management service. They take money, they tell you, and I wanted to ask them. I had a wrapper, an adapter that said, "Given this email, is this person subscribed?" But in the adapter, what I had to do is I had to call one endpoint that said, give me basically the ID of the person with this email address. And then I had to call another endpoint that said, tell me the subscription categorization of the person with this ID. Right. And then I had to say, here is the collection of subscription categories that correspond to subscribed. And here's the ones that don't. And here's the ones that I don't know what it means. And I'm going to just log it if it ever happens and say they are subscribed.
Right.
Because Recurly was not my favorite API ever. You might be able to tell.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about when I'm talking about semantic complexity. Maybe the timeouts wasn't a good example.
Yes, definitely. If there's more responsibility of the adapter or whatever to wrapper to coordinate and sort of go back and forth and translate and interpret, basically do more translation work, then I can. That's specific to that thing you're trying to do, then I can definitely see that.
And I'm definitely willing to make adapters that are thick in that way. Like I want my adapters to be tell me exactly what I want to hear, not what's easy to get. If that makes sense. Yeah,
no, I agree, and that's how I design my ports. Is the ports is the facade? What does my application want? I don't care about the nitty gritty stuff, because hey, that might even change. I might go from Recurly, now Stripe has subscription, so I don't want to, right? And that should be transparent to the rest as much as possible, to the rest of the application.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
But that's a good example of when there's a complex, possibly even back and forth protocol. Like an example I often use is, hey, I want to have something that allows me to book a seat for a movie theater, right? And now these days you can get a specific seat. But what if it has to query the 5 movie theaters near you before it can, as you drill down, and there's not one API, but it's coordinating multiple ones, each one slightly different. That's where it would really be interesting.
We didn't really get into this, but remember how in the die roller, when we added the roll multiple, we were able to use the nullable version to write easy tests of semantics?
Right.
The same thing happens with other sorts of adapters.
Yeah.
You have that more complex behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. So now in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, what would be more complicated that we could do? We may run out of streams before we run out of ideas for that. So
I'm imagine if it takes us 3 hours to do one adapter, then yes, we can come up with ideas pretty easily. I think we'll do the notifiers next time, and then we'll probably look at A-frame again. But I think what I really want to see next is what database stuff looks like.
I think that would be
I don't think we'll get to it in the next stream, because I think we'll do the notifier and then we'll look at like what does it look like when you combine them, and sort of more of the A-frame stuff.
Right.
The other thing I want to call out is that the nullables give you the opportunity to not use hexagonal, whereas I think the implementation you had with this, and the implementation you have is way cleaner than I typically see in the wild. Typically what I see is interaction-based testing, and usually not good interaction-based testing using mocks.
Right.
The nullables allow you to stay in a hexagonal structure or a layer cake architecture or whatever, but they also give the ability to move into a completely different structure that doesn't have an interface for every single class. And that just opens up the possibilities. I'm not going to say that A-frame is better than hexagonal. It has fewer files, which I like, but it's not obviously better than the really clean implementation you've got here. Right. And I would say even the nullables aren't obviously better than the stubs that you have here, because the stub is basically giving you sociable tests.
Exactly.
So, and it's the sociable tests I want. Yeah. But it does do it in a way that I think is more hidden away than the stubs are. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Because I think there's also, I don't think I necessarily have an objection, but some people would have an objection to what is basically test code in production code. And I've encountered people where they would have a problem with even a constructor that is used only for tests. Like, what happens if somebody misuses it? I'm like, okay, we can create a static factory. Now how do you feel? What if somebody calls it when they shouldn't? It's like, okay, now you were trying to solve a problem. That's just a people problem.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that too. I mean, the short answer is if first off, have you ever heard of JTAG? Which is, of course, the hardware standard for testing chips after they've been produced.
Exactly.
But then the slightly longer answer is, yeah, if you do not like modifying your code to make it more testable, then definitely don't do nullables, and you probably can't do testing either, because that's what it takes.
Yeah.
The reality is that when we're doing engineering, we are not only making a thing that it runs in production, but we're making a thing that works properly in production, and sometimes that means making some compromises.
Yeah.
It's possible. One thing that Matt and I did that I don't know if I love, but we basically split out all the stuff that we have starting on line 41 on the screen right now and put that in a separate file. Now, for me, the tight coupling between the stub and the production code makes sense to have it all in the same file, but I don't mind. I mean, I think I am okay with longer methods and files than Matt is, and possibly than you are as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much of a problem with this being in here. I mean, it really depends on sort of also how complex is sort of the actual production code. If this got too big, I would probably just pull this out into a separate file, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, and that's effectively what we did.
Yeah.
But as I was saying before, I think the strong, contrast between lots of nullable code and not very much production code is because the production code is super simple.
Right.
And we were dealing with sort of the worst case scenario in the code we were using, and that it's a thing that returns a thing that returns a thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the worst of all worlds is why it looks this way, unbalanced. Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah. Oh, we've gone over a little bit, so I guess now's a good spot to stop.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for hanging out. I know I appreciate you hanging out. We've been getting lots of great feedback in the various social media. So if you like this kind of stuff, I know, reassuring me that this is stuff that you're interested in, and not just that having a chat with James is always useful. So spread the word on Twitter and elsewhere that this was good. If you have any questions or feedback, you know where to find us. You can follow James on Twitter at James Shore, and links have been flowing through the chat, so you can always see those. And I think that's all.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.